I'll be reading submission number 5. What I'll be reading is an excerpt, and the fuller text can be found in the publication. Life as a Leaver. This piece was written by an alumna in response to an article titled "The Leavers: Young Doubters Exit the Church" by Drew Dyke, which was published in the November 2010 edition of Christianity Today. Here's an excerpt of Dyke's article, written to explore reasons why young people are leaving the church. The reasons for departing in each case were unique, but I realized that most leavers had been exposed to a superficial form of Christianity that effectively inoculated them against authentic faith. When sociologist Christian Smith and his fellow researchers examined the spiritual lives of American teenagers, they found most teens practicing a religion best called moralistic therapeutic deism, which casts God as a distant creator who blesses people who are good, nice, and fair. Its central goal is to help believers be happy and feel good about oneself. Where did teenagers learn this faith? Unfortunately, it's one taught implicitly and sometimes explicitly at every age level in many churches. It's in the air that many churchgoers breathe, from seeker-friendly worship services to low-commitment small groups. When this naive and coldly utilitarian view of God crashes on the hard rocks of reality, we shouldn't be surprised to see people of any age walk away. After reading Drew Dyke's article, "The Leavers: Young Doubters Exit the Church" in Christianity Today, I found myself feeling viscerally and personally offended. While numerous other valid critiques could be made of the piece, I have to concede that my response was sparked by a deeply personal experience. In December, my formerly Christian husband left me. In February, he asked for a divorce. With each month, new and nightmarish revelations followed. Needless to say, in my particular circumstances, I was not blameless, but I tried to do everything in my power to save my marriage, to win my husband back to the Lord, and to try to extricate him from his seemingly immovable depression. I believed, and still do, that marriage is sacred and was committed to stay in mine no matter what happened, even if that meant I could foresee only a life of misery at home. In other words, I did everything Al Mohler, John Piper, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, or others who decry the culture's casual view of marriage would have suggested or demanded. Every Christian I knew tried to approach my ex-husband, and I would guess that even my non-Christian friends and family offered up their own versions of prayers. But in the end, he walked away from his faith and from his vows, and left me scraping myself up off the floor. How does this relate to Dyke's thoughts on leavers? I would suggest that it relates fairly directly. Where Dyke observes a shallow, uninformed, utilitarian faith, my church background has been in the Presbyterian and Anglican traditions. That is, my maturation and establishment in the faith consisted of both the robustness of Reformed theology and the tradition and history of sacramental worship. I attended a Christian college, spent a year in missions work, over a year working for a Christian social services organization, and nearly 2 years in an evangelical seminary known for its integration of intellectual depth, Christian orthodoxy, and engagement in culture. But no amount of theology, liturgy, or depth can really and truly inoculate you against what Dyke refers to in passing as the hard rocks of reality, which is how he refers to suffering. This might not be true of the first collision, or the second, or even the third, but at some point, as I have done, you begin to question at least 2 pillars of Christian faith: sovereignty and love. Though I knew that there is suffering in the world, it never made me look at the doctrine of sovereignty in the eye, or made me question the refrain, "He is for your good." On some level, I felt that if one had good theology and was a thoughtful person, then she wouldn't question her faith because of suffering. I guess I believed that suffering was somehow a silly reason, one not fit for a deep person or an intellectual Christian. I learned in reading Job that we cannot fathom or grasp the mind of God or his workings in the world. I always thought that if we could understand or pin down God, he wasn't a God big enough to be worth believing in. If the gospel is true, the things that we observe and experience cannot prove it false. But what did it mean that while God is sovereign and while he works all things for my good, great sin was allowed to occur that would change my life forever? Was God using sin? Could he have done this to me? Is this what he wanted for me? Did he want me to honor my marriage and try my best to save it, only to have it fall apart in the cruelest of ways? I know that we don't always get what we ask for, and I realize that this view proves Dyke's point, in that it reflects a naive, coldly utilitarian view of God. But if God seemed fairly hands-off here, the next logical question seemed to be, what was the role of personal intercessory prayer, or the belief in a personal God? And if he was hands-on, what did it say about his character? Every time I think about returning to church, standing and singing hymns about God's care and love for us, songs that I used to sing, standing next to my husband in our beloved Massachusetts church, every time I want to return to my only comfort in life and death, that I am not my own, but belong in body and soul, in life and in death, to my faithful Savior, Jesus Christ, a la the Heidelberg Catechism, I'm overcome with sadness and anger. He is either sovereign and cruel or removed and abstract. I could read all of the theology in the world, I could worship in the oldest and most rooted of churches, and it would not settle this question for me. Surely, I am not the only person to have crashed on these rocks of sin and suffering, sovereignty and certainty. And I no longer think that it is a sign of immaturity or ignorance that these rocks give birth to doubt. In fact, I think it is immature and ignorant to deny these very real questions about rape, about mental illness, about earthquakes, about affairs, about divorce, about children born into extreme poverty. Where does sovereignty end and sin begin? And what does this say about God? Shouldn't this be relevant to any discussion of disbelief? But my own suffering was not the end of doubt for me. Rather, it has been a beginning. Now, the things that I used to have the energy and the will to battle or persuade myself of, I can no longer face. Many of these are things that friends, mostly from Christian colleges, who have already left the faith have been testifying to for a long time, things that I have tried to verbally refute. God didn't bring about your suffering. He created a world without sin and death. Or prove wrong with my life. Evangelicals can work for social justice. In the same way that I can no longer dismiss suffering as a legitimate impetus for doubt, neither can I dismiss the state and behavior of the church, issues of identity, and the reality that life in this world is complicated as hell. And now, as a divorced person, I have unfortunately been exposed to a new manifestation of Christian identity politics. While my divorce seems fairly straightforward, biblically speaking, and I had no control over my ex-husband's decision, I engaged in a little exercise a few months into the process and researched churches' and denominations' positions on divorce and remarriage. As we all know, the Catholic Church does not recognize even the accepted biblical allowances, except via the apparent loophole of annulments. But I was surprised to find that Reformed icon John Piper also opposes remarriage. While the Southern Baptists affirm the abandonment, adultery, and apostasy allowances, Al Mohler has recently taken to the blogosphere regarding the prevalence of Christian divorce. I have no problem with the high view of marriage. God knows I tried to adhere to it, but I do have a problem with having to try to discern what a given church's pronouncement will be on my tragically unavoidable status. The world is complicated, unpredictable, volatile, and tragic, but the church rarely has room for this, except in the theological debates that do not touch the laity, who are merely expected to toe the line. We cannot be surprised when young people are tired of facing in the church what they do not have to face in the culture.